Who do you run to when the people whose job it is to protect you become the very people that you need protection from? This is the story of two innocent Nigerian teenagers, 16-year-old Fabian Nnaemeka Ugwuoke and 17-year-old Izuchukwu Ayogu, who were brutally murdered by men of the Nigerian police force, and their only offense was that they were born in a place where police officers have little to no regard for human life. Nnaemeka Ugwuoke and Izuchukwu Ayogu were very good friends. They were both SS2 students of Nsukka High School, and they both lived in the university town of Nsukka, Enugu State, Nigeria. On Sunday, March 10, 2002, Nnaemeka Ugwuoke was sent on an errand by his father, Chief Michael Ugwuoke, and his friend Izuchukwu Ayogu decided to accompany him. On their way, 3 police officers accosted them and attempted to force them into a car. The boys, who had committed no offense whatsoever, decided to run away from the aggressive and intimidating police officers, and they were chased, caught, and beaten by these officers. The officers then handed the boys over to the DPO of Nsukka Police Division, Mr. Gambo Sarki. Mr. Gambo forced both of them into the boot of his car and drove them to Nsukka Police Station. During the entire ordeal, before they were taken to the station, members of the community who knew the families of the boys saw what went down and quickly informed the families that their boys had been arrested by the police. Mr. Gambo Sarki locked the boys up and instructed the officers on duty not to release the boys to anybody, and he left the station. The parents of the boys arrived shortly after, and they were told by the officers on duty that the boys had committed no crime whatsoever, but that they were given a standing order by their boss not to release the boys to anybody, and that also it was weekend and bail can't be granted during the weekend. The parents got the authorities of Nsukka High School involved in the case, and all efforts to get the boys out that same day proved abortive. Having pulled all the strings they could pull that Sunday, it dawned on the parents that their teenage children would be spending the night at the station, and they retreated home for the night with the intention of returning very early the next day to get their boys out. At this point, the parents were probably still thinking that this was just another police extortion incident, and they hoped that the next day they would pay bail and get their boys out of detention, but they were in for the shock of their lives. By 3 a.m. the following day, Monday, March 11, 2002, the DPO Gambo was already back at the station, and he got the boys out of their cell, took them to a distant location, and brutally murdered them. What Gambo Sarki did to those boys, if you do the same thing to even animals in a sane country, you will never get away with it. I will talk about what he did to these boys in a few minutes. Anyway, by 7 a.m. on March 11, 2002, the parents were back at the station to get their kids out of detention. All the officers at the station, including the DPO, suddenly denied the boys and told their parents that they had never in their life set their eyes on the boys and that they were not in their custody. The parents couldn't believe the sudden amnesia by the same police officers whom they had met the previous day. But somehow, the parents were successfully able to get information from those who were also detained in the station alongside the boys the previous day. Acting on the information they had just received, they quickly went to the public cemetery in Nsukka. On getting there, they saw a large pool of fresh blood, a polythene bag soaked with blood, and new spent cartridges on the floor, but there was no dead body there or any newly dug grave. The parents went about inquiring from those who lived around the area, and they were told by the residents that during the wee hours of the day, they heard screams of teenage boys screaming their innocence, after which they heard gunshots and then the screaming ceased. At this point, even though the parents had not yet seen the bodies of their kids, they started to slowly realize that their teenage boys had just become the latest victims of police extrajudicial killings. The news started to rapidly spread around Nsukka by word of mouth, and by the following day, Tuesday, March 12, 2002, the parents got information that 2 mutilated bodies were just dumped at a construction site in Obimo. The traditional ruler of Obimo, Igwe Spencer Ugwuoke, decided to confront DPO Gambo Sarki with the information he had just gotten about the 2 mutilated bodies that were dumped at a construction site. While he was at the station, the Igwe was intentionally and tactfully delayed at the station, and as he was being delayed there, some officers left in an outgun jeep to the construction site where the bodies were dumped. They took the bodies in their jeep and went further into the bush in another neighboring town called Ugwuoke and dumped the bodies there. At this point, the foul play by the police had become very apparent, and members of the community did not need a prophet to tell them that the boys had been murdered by the police. A violent protest immediately broke out. Men, women, boys and girls took to the streets demanding justice for the slain kids. The protest caught the attention of the Enugu State Police Command, and to appease the angry crowd and stop the further widespread of the protest, Gambo Sarki was immediately stripped of his position and replaced by another officer, and Gambo Sarki, alongside all the other officers suspected to be involved in the death of the boys, were arrested immediately. The Enugu State Police Command opened an inquiry into the death of the two teenage boys, and during the inquiry, some of the police officers involved in the whole ordeal started to confess in order to save themselves. The driver of the Argon jeep that took the bodies from the construction site in Obimo to another bush in Ugwuoke was one of the officers who confessed during the inquiry by the Enugu State Police Command. The driver took detectives and family members of the murdered boys to the bush where the bodies were finally dumped, and nothing could have prepared the parents of the boys for what they saw when they got to the bush where their slain kids were dumped. The boys were not just only killed, but their vital organs were taken. The eyeballs of the boys were missing, and the skull of one of the boys was ripped open and his brain was removed. By the following month, April 2002, the inquiry by the Enugu State Police Command came to an end, and the DPO Gambo Sarki was indicted for murder. The findings of the inquiry were also released. The findings revealed that the DPO Gambo Sarki ordered junior officers to shoot the boys, and they refused to obey the instruction. Then Gambo Sarki himself took the gun and shot the boys himself. Here are parts of the released reports of the inquiry by the Enugu State Police Command. There is strong evidence to believe that the boys were actually arrested by the DPO, put in the boot of his car and brought to the station for detention. There was no entry of crime committed by the two boys in the station's crime diary. The entry of their detention in the prisoner's property lockup register kept at the counter was tampered with. The two boys were actually shot as Isuja by Mr. Gambo Sarki through the gun he collected from Inspector John Ugu of Anti-Crime Patrol Team. As for the recommendation on further action to be taken against Gambo Sarki and the other officers involved, the report stated, after exhaustive discreet investigation, it becomes clear that it is a premeditated action on the part of the officer, Gambo Sarki. Therefore, it is obvious that a clear case of murder of Nnaemeka Ugwuoke and Izuchukwu Ayogu was firmly established against Gambo Sarki. It is therefore recommended that he be charged to court as such, while the indicted policemen should face severe disciplinary action. The report of the inquiry by the Enugu State Police Command was sent to Nigeria's new Inspector General of Police at the time, Mustapha Adebayo Balogun, and detectives were sent to Nsukka by police authorities in Abuja. The detectives carried out even more arrests. Gambo Sarki and all the officers implicated in the inquiry were then taken to Abuja. Members of Nsukka community and the parents of the slain teenagers had some hope and relief because they believed that the officers involved had been handed over to higher authorities and were about to face the wrath of the law for their crimes, but they were in for a rude awakening. Shortly after Gambo Sarki was arrested, he quote-unquote escaped from custody and was never seen ever again to this day, and with time, all the other officers arrested were released. As I speak to you, 23 years later after Fabian Nnaemeka Ugwuoke and Izuchukwu Ayogu were killed, not one person has at least even faced trial for the murder of the boys. I wish this was Nollywood, where the bad guys suffer in the end, but this is Nigeria.
This is Nigeria. Look, I'm living now.